Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. Because my original video reviewing this was far too long, I figured I'd split out a longer reading of the Beowulf translation by Maria Dahvana Headley onto a separate video. So you get two videos for me this Thursday because I'm up late anyway for reasons and have nothing better to do than to talk at all of you and make videos and do poetry recitations for Poetry Thursday, because I wouldn't want to miss 2 Thursdays in a row. So we're picking up where the dragon is getting encountered. So this poem is in 3 acts, and the last of the acts is when Beowulf is much older. 50 years have passed since his encounters with Grendel and Grendel's mother. So he's an old king. He's led a long and prosperous life of pretty much peace, based on his reputation from the encounters with Grendel and Grendel's mother. And then somebody goes and stumbles into a dragon's hoard and steals 1 cup and lets loose the rage of a dragon. If that sounds oddly familiar to you, i.e. Smaug, The Hobbit, Bilbo, guess where Tolkien got the idea? All right. At once the dragon woke, choking on fury. She huffed her hoard, winding herself around it, revulsion kindling within her, the sour scent of an enemy man, the footprints of a plunderer who'd blundered past her sleeping skull and had seen her secret dreaming place. We all know stories like this one. A man unmarked by fate may sometimes cloak himself in God's grace, passing close to monsters unbeheld. The hoard holder fine-toothed the ground, fire forging for the man who'd invaded her bedchamber. Wide she circled, planning his disemboweling, claw-mapping every inch of wilderness, though no man there to capture. She imagined a wild battle, flexed rapturously, then undulated into her lair to hunt again for the missing cup, only to rediscover the telltale evidence someone had desecrated her delights. Teeth gritted, she ticked until nightfall, that guardian of old gold and haunted history, her urge toward murder more intense by the moment. Eventually, ecstatic, she outlasted the light. Into darkness she emerged and put the world on blast, roaring into the sky a comet of catastrophe. Villagers in the vicinity felt her attack first, their lands blackened, but soon it would be their lord and treasure-giver suffering. The dragon swooped low and spat flame, destroying both manor and hovel, scrawling red RSVPs in the sky. The winged ringer had no time for survivors. She skywrote her grievances, then rewrote them roughly in landfire from end to end of Geat realm, her scaly helm shining as she sang insults from the clouds. Back to her ridge she whipped as the sun showed itself, slithering into her gold stock, locking herself away. She'd exhaled upon their ground, and now they burned. Black blood. Bah! She slept, trusting in human frailty to keep her lair unmolested. That trust would turn to dust, like everything. Soon Beowulf received a blistering missive. His own hall, his heart home, had combusted. He'd been ghost-thrown by the skyborn gold holder. To the good man, this region's ring-giver, this was distress unbearable. Punishment, perhaps, from the Lord. Unjust? He worried. Waited. Had he broken old covenants? Unwarded his soul? Doubt dawned as he considered deeds long done, sins kept secret. He wasn't used to feeling insecure. Meanwhile, the fire drake raked coast to coast with claws, charred gilded Geatland without pause, crimson blazes and black billows, until the old war king woke to action, plotting vengeance on the stranger. The foremost warrior projected for his own protection a myth-worthy shield, made entirely of iron. He knew no forest gift could defend him. His safety lay in smithy. Linden couldn't withstand lightning. Though Beowulf didn't predict he'd die in this fight, he and the dragon both, he'd always known that fate could fuck a fighter up, no matter the hoards he held, no matter the luck he'd had. The ring collector was too proud to bring a war band to march an enemy against the firmament flyer. His plan would be his pyre. He imagined the dragon a dimwit, cocking neither her courage nor her grit. He had for years been up in it, persevering through pain and danger, countless grim battles since he'd saved Hrothgar and Heorot, since he'd rushed Grendel and all his kin, knocking that damned family to the mat. One of the worst of those hand-to-hand hells had been the one when Hygelac, Geat king, closest comrade, perished in Friesland. His skin became sheath for a sword, his skull a cup overflowing with blood. Beowulf saved himself only by swimming, fleeing the massacre by sea, bearing back as he swam 30 suits of armor torn from corpses he'd created. The het-wearer had no joy of him, hiding their heads beneath their own splintering linden as Beowulf ground them into the cold sand. Few saw home again. Solitary, salt-scourged, he swam screaming over ocean open, Ithgau's son repatriating, grief-stricken to his homeland. Hygd tried to quicken him with the throne, offering him gold, gemstones, a potent position, a life less lonely. Her own son she didn't trust to govern, to keep borders, trust against deploying hordes. Now his daddy was dead. She couldn't convince Beowulf to step over Heardred, nor consent to come over to her bed, but instead he offered his counsel to the boy king until he was man enough to rule the Weeder Geats himself. Soon thereafter exiled appeared over the salt highway, Ulfhere's sons, who raised a coup against their old wave king Onela. He was the ruler of the Schiffings. He had given gold from his kingdom seat, was master of their mead hall. Heedless, Heardred received the refugees and traded his life for it. His reception repaid in regrets. A fatal flash of Onela's sword, and Hygelac's line was ended. The Swede king, satisfied, set off on the briny boulevard, and Beowulf, bereaved, ascended the Geat throne in grief, never surrendering his reluctance to become the ruler. That was a good king. In later days our man paid the killers in kills, avenging his dead prince by befriending Idgils, the last of the Swedish rebel sons. Beowulf sent him an army of sea-born swords, and tied a scarlet ribbon around the blood feud, exterminating Onela. And so Ygithau's heir inherited a complement of king's qualifiers. Dangers rare, treasures tragic, constant proofs of courage, excelling at every impossibility, until the day came for him to kill the dragon. The Geat king rode with 11 companions, firing himself into fury as he hunted the lair's location. By then he'd found the smoking gun, the embezzlement that stoked the dragon's rage. The gilt cup had been brought to him by the burglar who'd begun this, and that thief on life tilt became the 13th man, rife with regrets, compelled to guide an expedition back to the scene of his crime. The unwilling guest of the king led the rest in safety of daylight to the hide he'd strayed into, a golden grave near the salt shoals and trembling tides. Piled inside like scales were mounds of etched metal, detailed by the dead along with the veteran guardian, who now never slept. She was the sole barrier to entry. But burrowed beneath the earth as she was, there was no simple way to bring death to her den. The old king fell to his knees on the cliff point and willed good fortune upon the Geats he ruled, those who'd sat fireside, warmed by his gold. Stricken, suddenly unsteady, he foresaw his fate in the fog, shrouded but certain. For a moment he felt his old foes fen-bound, embarking alone. Soon his own lease would expire, evicting him from hall, hearth, and home. Beowulf, Ygithau's son, manned up, mastered himself, set it straight. I lived whole lives in my youth, endless combat, great wars. I remember every moment even now. When I was 7, my father sent me out to sleep in the king's house. He dropped me on a new daddy, King Herethel, who kept me safe, opened his hands, treated me, a fosterling, like his own sons. Never was I less dear to him than Herebeald, or Hæthcyn, or even my best loved Hygelac. The eldest Herebeald tumbled into an early grave, done in by his brother Hæthcyn, tugged his bone bow, flinging a missile that missed the mark, sharp-toothed his sibling's heart, a bloody thorn. There was no way to mourn for him, no vengeance to be had, for what could mitigate the blame? Who was left to shame for this and heart-thieving? Nobody. It's the same sort of sorrow when a man outlives his son, sees him climb the gallows and swing, sentenced justly for crimes against the king. The father hollers out a sob to rapturing ravens, witnesses his boy swallowing dust, unable to plead his case. No settlement in silver can buy a child back from the gods of the air. The father awakens disgraced in despair thereafter, knowing his inheritor's been erased. He has no verve, no urge to visit beds, no wish to father a new son, now his firstborn's dead. He stares in sorrow at his child's empty room, hears the dreary wind that habits there now. His hall is silent, cheerless, hungry hearth without holes. Riders sagging in their saddles, heroes hidden, where once singers sang and harps were fingered, where a yard full of sons were brothers, abandoned on earth, left to live alone with only sins to number. The Grey King retreats to slumber, moaning dirges. What son, what wife, what life, what song? That, friends, is a passage out of Beowulf. If you've never read Beowulf, please do. Um, Check out my review. I review this at length. And if you've never read Beowulf, grab that translation or grab the Seamus Heaney translation. I think you'll be fine with either one, depending on what you look for and what you can expect to find. You can find out by checking out my review. So thank you for joining me on this Poetry Thursday.